The last 43 years, some would argue, the last 60 years have been a period of arrested transition. Some would argue that the liberation movement and independence was incomplete, was an incomplete process that arrested a transition and remained us in the same vortex and in the same traps that we were in since 1888 when the Rat concession was executed. The only thing is that faces have changed, and which is why it's so fashionable these days to hear young people say Ian Smith was better than. It is a reflection of that incomplete transition or of that arrested transition. But there's a genuine transition that is taking place in Zimbabwe. There's a genuine transition that has to be managed. There's a genuine transition that has to be shepherded. There's a genuine transition that has to be scaffolded. If it's not scaffolded, and it's bigger than ZANU-PF, it's bigger than the military. If it's not scaffolded and shepherded, we are going to go to Armageddon. We're going to go to an implosion. What exactly do I mean by that? It is my submission that Zimbabwe has operated on the basis of 6, 7, or 8 or so pillars of a consensus, a liberation consensus. But that consensus has reached its limit. We are genuinely transiting from it. And because we're genuinely transiting with it, it needs to be shepherded. What are those four corners of that transition that has kept Zimbabwe as it is, as we know it today? The first one, A, has been the liberation polity and the liberation generation. Takarwa Wondo, we fought in the war. These are our values. This is our system. And the liberation project has arrested this country, has been holding this country in its full grip, literally and metaphorically, from 1980. And operating on the culture of impunity, the doctrine of entitlement, and ensuring that no one comes close to it. B, we've been operating on the basis of a consensus anchored around a securocratic state and electoral authoritarianism, the ritual of an election that is scaffolded by the military and a securocratic state. We go to elections, but the outcome is predetermined. Since 1938, we've had 12 elections whose outcome has been contested, but whose outcome has been actualized. The third pillar of the consensus has been patronage. Patronage has been dished out in the form of land, of companies, of mining concessions, of procurement contracts, of post jobs in the public service, ambassadorialships, and so forth. This patronage, to a very large extent, has been evenly distributed amongst the elite of Zimbabwe, not the ordinary Wananji, not the ordinary persons. Number D, we have had a policy and a polity pillared on capture and total emasculation of state institutions. There is no institution in Zimbabwe that is independent. There is no institution in Zimbabwe that is not an extension of ZANU-PF's Politburo. Whether it's the Chapter 13 institutions of the Constitution, your Human Rights Commission, your Anti-Corruption Commission, they are all extensions of the ruling party. They are all elections, extensions of ZANU-PF. And I want to argue here that every institution, including those that I can mention because I'm a practicing lawyer, every institution in Zimbabwe has been captured and captured thoroughly. Another pillar which has kept ZANU-PF surviving is poverty and ignorance. And a mismanaged economy has guaranteed a population that has no agency, a population that has no agency, a population that is not capable of fighting back. A next pillar has been the existence of a credible, even if small, alternative voice in the form of unions, in the form of an opposition party, the MDC. That consensus that there are little voices who speak out and moderate and prevent some present some form of checks and balances has existed in the last 40 years or so. And then finally, we've had a Westphalian or world order with a common definition of internationalism, the rule of law, and human rights. But these things are now gone. All of these above are now gone. First, what has challenged the old consensus is the demographic factor and natural attrition. The liberation generation is gone. It's hanging on. It's in its late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's quite clear that if the next president is a war veteran, the one after that will never be a war veteran, just by age alone, not by election and so forth. So this means that we are actually in a genuine transition, a demographic transition, which needs to be managed. Connected to that is the demographic curve. 69% of the population is below the age of 35. And this is a population that is rapidly expanding. The current population of Zimbabwe right now is 15 million. By 2050, this population would have doubled. Yet we are not producing the 2 million jobs that are required to be created per year in order to meet their demands by the year 2050. So an implosion is coming. A demographic transition is taking place, which needs to be managed. A third thing, which is critical, which is threatening. Hello. A third thing, which is threatening the old consensus, is the vacuum being created by the departure of the liberation generation, being filled by the rise of a parasitic comprado elite that has no social base at all, that has no shame, that has no elasticity, and that has conflicted itself with the state palace and the state house. Some of them, as Sekuru Ibo said, some of them are being fast-tracked to the presidia. The next president of Zimbabwe could be Kudakwache, Tapire, and that's a total disaster. The rise of this blank, totally vacuous comprado elite that is so proximate to the seat of power. Another factor is the economic mismanagement. Another factor is the deindustrialization and the brain drain. Another factor that has threatened the consensus is, of course, the 2030 agenda. So there's some collection of all these factors. The sum collection of all these factors is that we have a crisis that needs to be managed. We have a crisis that needs to be managed to avoid an implosion. That's where the NTA comes in. The NTA is basically an idea that is anchored on dialogue. The citizens of Zimbabwe, the Wananchi of Zimbabwe, must talk and dialogue, which is why the first process quite clearly has to be the national conference or the national convention. The national convention must be attended by every Zimbabwean. But of course, 15 million people cannot attend to that. That means there must be representative organizations of the many and varied constituencies in Zimbabwe, starting with the church, labor, and what remains of it, the unemployed, the youth, women, war veterans, the academia, the professionals, the students, and the conference or convention must articulate issues that speaks to Zimbabwe's fragility and vulnerability. Issues that speak to Zimbabwe's fragility and vulnerability. And those issues must be put on the table, including, number one, the issue of nationhood. What does it mean to be a Zimbabwean? What is a Zimbabwean? The issue of an inclusive vision. What is the Zimbabwe we want? What is the Zimbabwe we expect? The issue of the integrity of Zimbabwe as a nation state, the issue of devolution and decentralization must be on the table. The issue of transitional justice must be on the table. But these are nation-building matrices. Before we go to the economy and the whatever, we must address those things that go to the root of Zimbabwe as a nation state. So nationhood demands identity. What does it mean for a Bocha, a Kalanga to be a Zimbabwean, and Debele to be a Zimbabwean, a Korekore to be a Zimbabwean? What is the vision? What is the mission of Zimbabwe? The issue of transitional justice is important, not because we want to be arrested by the review mirror, but a look at the review mirror will make us avoid the potholes of the past in order to liberate a new Zimbabwe. So these issues, these structural issues, these foundational issues, these base issues must be discussed before we go to superstructural issues. Superstructural issues include transitional issues, include long-term issues. So the issue of the economy is key. The issue of collapsed infrastructure is key. The issue of modernization is key, including the burning issue of the environment, the burning issue of artificial intelligence. The issue of a developmental agenda is key. What developmental trajectory are we going to embark on is key. The issue of ending Zimbabwe's isolation and total integration is key. It must be at the table of the national convention. The issue of infrastructure, gross capital formation is key. The issue of the National Democratic Revolution is key. It must be discussed at the National Transitional Authority.